Floy is Hazel's fishing companion. Floy has a car and drives. Hazel does not drive. They fish together from different places, often at our pond back of the barn. Floy never eats fish. She doesn't like it, but she enjoys fishing because she says it's relaxing. I can't get her to go any place else, says Hazel, but if I just name fishin', she's ready to come. On Sunday afternoon, therefore, I baked Floy's persimmon pudding recipe, which fills 2 big pans with pudding and the house with a heavenly smell. Nothing can possibly taste as good as that recipe smells baking. The Judas came. Bob, an artist, brought me a masterful oil painting of the stone fence along the Tefler farm in this community. He had some writing planned for me to do for him. Miss Judah smelled the pudding, which unfortunately was not done enough to share with her, and she offered me her recipe, which is different because it is baked in a gallon crock. I already had Monta's recipe, which is different because it uses breadcrumbs and a cooked sauce boiled to thin thickness, Monta says, and I had Aunt Hattie's recipe, which is different because it uses no spices, and Aunt Lois's, which is different because Aunt Lois was not like anybody else, and Bernice's, which is different because she lives in another part of the state, raises corn and hogs, plays the harp, travels to Europe, and sends me carbons of the round robin letters she writes her family. Hazel and I got out the recipes afterward and compared them. How much is lump of butter size of an egg? Inquired Hazel earnestly. One woman got mad at me because I couldn't tell exactly. She thought I was trying to keep my recipe a secret from her. Hazel gave me her recipe. The next week, Miss Dixon of Lafayette sent me her recipe for Yankee persimmon pudding. A Farm Bureau bulletin provided me with 2 more, and at a meeting of IU faculty women, Dr. Kinsey's wife gave me hers. With all this richness, it was inevitable that I should become a persimmon pudding recipe collector. This is Floy's recipe: 2 cups persimmon, 1 cup brown sugar, 1 cup white sugar, 3 cups sweet milk, 3 cups flour, 1 teaspoon baking powder, 3 eggs, ½ cup butter, 1 teaspoon cinnamon, ½ teaspoon nutmeg. Separate eggs, beat whites, add last, bake at 325. The hazards that won farming second place in the list of the nation's most hazardous occupations include fence building. A farmer's skin is thin protection from the rebuttal of the natural world as an unfenced area tries to hold its own against fence stretchers, barbed wire, farm machinery, grazing livestock, and chemical spraying. When the hay baling paused for a second growth and the corn spraying was over, the men started stringing 80 rods of line fence along an area of Ira's farm that had not been fenced or tilled for several years. In such places, the wilderness moves back in determinedly. The men hauled rolls of barbed wire, fence stretchers, pliers, axe, hammer, fence, steeples, wood, and steel posts. In the wagon, tractor pulled. Nature, to oppose this invading army, lined up an array of insects, water obstacles, and a list of plants like a chapter from Gray's Botany. There was one plant, reported Dick, one day at dinner, that stung so much if you merely brushed against it, you could feel it for half an hour. It looked like an elm leaf, but it wasn't. From curiosity, and also because it was I who had wanted the woods fenced, I went down to interview that angry plant, which was of course wood nettle. While I was carefully breaking off two brittle stalks with my gloved hands, I unknowingly stepped on some plants the tractor had run over. My ankles discovered my error immediately and remembered it for a full half-hour after. The sensation of nettle sting is like a prolongation of the beginning of a bee sting. The stinging keeps up, never developing into a real ache or breaking out into streams of blood, just gaining momentum and in addition acquiring the acute ecstasy of itch offered by poison ivy. The nettle plants, cousins of the beautiful and harmless jewelweed, were from 1 to 3 feet tall, the leaves on long stems and set alternately on tapering rounded stalks. The leaf is shaped like an embittered mulberry leaf, but instead of having the mulberry's graceful finial, it ends in a sharp point, as if it wished it could also stab. The outer edge of the leaf is notched into sharp sawtooth points. The undersides are made fuzzy by numerous delicate hairs, menacing as the stinger of a wasp. They are set at irregular intervals and point in seemingly haphazard directions. A fence builder who has to follow a definite, disciplined straight line cannot find any safe approach to the nettles. What courage or ignorance it must have taken for the first hardy pioneers to penetrate American forests and carve out their farms without even a bottle of merthiolate. "If I get the corn all planted this week, I'll mow hay next week," said Dick at supper. Hay, roses, last strawberries, staining your fingertips fragrantly, early transparent apples ripe enough for pale green applesauce, cherries ripening with a ceramic gleam, robins hatching in the nest on the ledge of the back porch window, cardinals guarding the white rose bush, red-winged blackbirds, nests beautifully basket-woven around 4 tall weed stalks in the hayfield and cut off by the mower, a quail's nest full of eggs discovered on the ground in time for a farmer to avoid it with the mower, a meadowlark singing from heaven's blue page, noon dinners in the dining room with the blue dishes and tall iced tea glasses on the red and white tablecloth, and the farm family and several additional young men and anybody else who happens by at noon, all eating hungrily, gaily, mornings early and evenings late, the evening song of the whippoorwill and the daytime concert of the mockingbird perched on some high place like the rim of the silo because he realizes what it does for his song, fireflies rising at dusk from the grassy yard, things well in hand and weedless in the garden, early tomatoes turning pale, preliminary to turning red, smell of hay curing, wind rising, ceasing, the continual inconsistency of hoping for rain because it takes 200,000 gallons of water to make a ton of alfalfa hay, and hoping for rain to hold off because it takes a day's good sun to cure hay in the long windrow. Sound of people laughing, of men calling to each other across a field, of tractors hurrying in and out and around the place, and along the roads big machinery running smoothly or creating an unnatural stillness when something breaks. At dusk, the beautiful tiredness of a day's energy spent in a good task accomplished. The haying episode is one of the busiest, most hazardous and pleasantest times of the farm year. A farmer continually matches his wits against weather, machinery, his own endurance. Only a free man could work as hard as a farmer must and does willingly in haying time. Only a free man could make the necessary sacrifices. When farmers cease to depend on their own strength, skill, and judgment, either because they dare not act independently or because they need not, the land will suffer. History indicates that for a country, hunger is the price paid for loss of farm freedom. In company with 2 cameras that would hang like millstones around my neck until they got attention, I went out to the alfalfa field where Dick and Joe and a couple of Joe's contemporaries, sons of neighbors here, were baling hay. Dick was driving one tractor to the side delivery hay rake, turning the hay he had mowed the day before. The rake sidled along bashfully, turning the windrow in a long curling roll that left the hay in a new row 6 feet farther west, with the underside turned up to cure in the sun's heat. Another tractor pulling the baler and wagon was being driven by Richard Zellers, son of a former neighbor here and then in the Coast Guard and home on a 30-day leave before going to a year's tour of duty in Alaska. While Richard spent his leave in the hot hayfields of Maple Grove, his parents were vacationing in the cool Northeast. It was Richard's choice. "The only bad thing about this vacation is going back," he said one day at dinner. Joe graduated that month from Purdue University and home on leave before going into National Guard training at Camp Knox, was on the hay wagon. I climbed up beside him. He was taking green, sharp-edged bales from the baler's short elevator and stacking them on the wagon. Scorning the iron hay hook Dick and I always used, he grasped the bale by its brown, insect-proof twines, gave it a fast swing, rested it almost imperceptibly on another bale, then tossed it up into place on the growing stairway of green bales at the end of the wagon. Youth is a wonderful fuel, especially with the impetus of fresh release from the classroom. "This is the best hay we've put up this summer," he told us. "Always load the downhill bale first, and then the others will fall into place." This hay had been cut when perfectly ready and had not been rained on. "I finally got the wagons fixed the way I wanted them," continued Joe. "Did you notice those new boards in the back rack? Really holds the bales stacked now. No matter how efficient one farming generation is, the new one has improvements, and fortunate is the farmer of the first generation, who has the youth on the farm with him and the wisdom to share the authority with him." I get off the wagon and went to ride on the tractor with Dick a while. He was in that supremely happy state a farmer goes into when everything is going well and he indulges himself in the belief that it's always going to. Before I left the field, I took pictures of everything. Joe said, "Be sure to be watching when we bring the hay in. We're going to pull 3 wagons with 1 tractor." Be sure to get a picture of it. Jim May and Dick Francis are coming to help us put it into the loft. We won't be in for supper until late. As I left the field, I looked back, admiring the work. The field, the hay, the farm, the summer afternoon, life itself, and the American system of free agriculture. In the long run, the greatest reward about farming is the sense of a personal worth a man gets from having authority over a portion of land. A farmer is his own man. Whether he owns 40 acres or 400 makes no difference, except, of course, in the income. In this community, agriculture is not the chief source of income, nor even the best-known product of the land. The oolitic limestone land, source of Indiana's fine building stone, which is used in homes, churches, public buildings all over the United States, and valued for its endurance and adaptability. Indiana limestone lends its simple elegance equally to straight lines or decorative carved designs. Limestone underlies the hills of the farms around here, including this one and Ira's, and it crops up where the hills are washed bare. Not all of it is suitable for building use. There are stone fences in this community, durable dry masonry laid up by skilled stonemen many years ago, from flat stones struck out of the hillsides. One such fence encloses the Maple Grove Church and Cemetery. Some of the farms have fields enclosed with stone fences. When the farms were marked off into fields, some of the early farmers set corner posts or gate posts of sawed stone with iron brackets for hinges. Benny had some here, and there are some at the roadside edge of Ira's cornfield, next to the road and back on his fields. We like them, though few of them serve either fence or gate any more. There is one stone post at the front corner of the yard, here beside the driveway. It has stood there out of the way of buggies and wagons, neighbors on foot or horseback, cars, farm machinery, livestock, for close to 100 years. It leaned slightly to the west, like an old man insatiably curious about what was going on at the field down the road. When the county blacktopped the Maple Grove Road one summer, the truck backed against the old post and broke it off. It was about 13 inches square, stood 4½ feet above the ground, and probably weighed about 600 pounds. No fence was fastened to it, and no gate swung from it, but it was an old farm mark, and we regretted its loss. Comfort came from our neighbor, Hubert Brown, who owns a stone mill and loves Indiana limestone as heartily as Dick loves fine, purebred cattle. We can fix that, Brownie said, whipping out his stone rule. I doubt that Brownie ever goes any place, even to the Episcopal Church, where he is an alderman, without his folding stone rule. A stone artist handles this rule as if it were something alive. He takes it out of his pocket with one hand and moves that hand quickly, gently, and the rule springs like a live cat, opens up and straightens out full length. It folds up dexterously in the same way, and the stoneman puts it back into his hip pocket and smiles. It makes an admirable parlor trick. People gasp and marvel. We have a new epoxy, said Brownie, who never underestimates the potential of stone in the building industry. It will glue that post together, and you couldn't break it again in the same place. He came again on Thursday with his wife, whose real name is Carol, but has taken the name Sari because she lives in Sari Stout's 140-year-old stone house, having first loved it back from the jaws of death. On Thursday came also Bert Payne and Charlie Condra, stone artists who work at Brownie's mill and share his enthusiasm for Indiana limestone. They came on their day off in the mill's red truck that has a powerful mobile lift attached to it and a sign painted on its door, "Not for hire." It was fascinating to watch those men set up the post, as it is always fascinating to watch skilled artists in performance. Charlie made penciled hieroglyphics on both pieces of the stone post. Charlie can carve stone or draw a straight line on it without using a ruler. Bert picked up an electric drill and bored a hole in the limestone as easily as an apple core bites into a ripe pippin. They set an 8-inch hollow pin in the opening. To mix the quick-setting new epoxy, Bert squeezed 8 inches of butter-like paste into a small amount of syrup-colored liquid in a metal can and stirred it as if mixing butter and molasses for Dutch honey. The chemical reaction made the can hot. With the pin then firmly set into the long piece of the post, they hooked 2 loops of heavy chain around it, holding it hooklessly by a slipped knot. This 10-inch metal tool looks as if it might be the old rusty metal clasp taken from a giant's garter. The slipped knot doesn't scratch or chip limestone, which is, in its way, delicate of surface even when seasoned. When first quarried out of the ground, limestone is called raw, and has to be let outdoors like lumber several months to season. Seasoning weathering adds continually to its beauty and strength. Now came the big test. We all held our breaths, and Sari Brown involuntarily gave a slight shove in the air as Bert boomed the long piece over the stub, and the stone settled down in the joy of eternal reunion. Watching these stones artists handle their favorite medium in that skillful, almost affectionate way, I thought in sudden revelation, this is the way that geologist felt who was here last spring. He thought he had discovered good stone in our southeast field and wanted to lease it and do some core drilling for a limestone quarrying development. He had drawn up a suggested contract in which he referred to the soil there as the overburden. To a stoneman, anything that hides good stone is overburden, but to a farmer the overburden is the precious flesh of earth itself. And when we read the contract, we shuddered and handed it back unsigned. Levi doesn't carry a club or stock whip or hot rod to load cattle, said Dick admiringly. The day after Levi, Oliver had hauled a load of steers for him to the Worthington feeder auction. Levi lives on a small family farm near here that was badly eroded until he became soil conservation conscious. He is the quietest cattle loader I've ever known. Most of them think they have to holler and scream and cuss and force the cattle up into the chute. Yesterday morning we just backed the truck up to the loading chute, and I went into the barn and drove the steers into the nearest stall, and before the last ones were in the stall, the first ones had walked right on up and got out into the truck. Neither of us had to say a word to him. Levi has driven a school bus for several years, which may have developed ways of patience in him. On the other hand, he and his wife have had children in school for 35 years, which may have developed ways of patience on the school bus. Some of Levi's children have already finished college with honors. He is a supervisor on the local soil conservation committee and a faithful worker in the Baptist church. He has a soft voice and doesn't talk much at any time. Cattle don't like all this hollering and profanity, Dick went on. It makes them nervous. Beating them around in the sale rings shows them off at a disadvantage too, if the sellers just realized it. They're on edge, mad, and they get contrary. It doesn't pay. Do you think cattle feel depressed or suffer from moods? I asked. Oh yes, he told me about a feeble-minded steer that walked out on the frozen pond twice while the more intelligent ones sipped safely from the cold, thawed edges. About a feeble-minded calf that tried to cross a thawing terrace at full speed and bawling. He slid 16 feet, scooping up mud all the way into the trough made by his opened lower jaw, until mud stopped the bawling. He told me about the cow that was ailing for no reason except moodiness, and after coddling and attention, she recovered and stays all right as long as she feels she is a pet. Finally, he got around to mention of old Jers, the real pet who likes to be pampered by being allowed to walk slowly. We understand each other, he said. I let her walk as slowly as she pleases, and I never saw any creature that could walk so slowly. A good cattle farmer knows his cattle as well, and individually as good as a good teacher knows his pupils. I have one big Hereford that has arthritis in her hip and doesn't want to be touched, he said. She raises a good calf every year. When I went to turn the cattle into another field, all I need to do is open the gate and call Sook Calf. Just once, wherever she is, she gets up and comes, and the rest follow her. There's no use using a dog or stick to drive cattle. They resent it. He stopped, looked me in the eye steadily, and then went on. They resent it even more than anyone in your family does. But if you let 'em think it don't make any difference to you, they'll come right into the barn. Is there really such a thing as a dumb animal? I was thinking. Dick went on. Some of 'em like to stand in the doorway, blocking the rest, and they understand blocking and guarding as well as any basketball player ever did. I'd like to show Branch McCracken how they do. And when a cow flips her tail, it's the same thing as a man uttering a cuss word. The Guernsey cow has a calf this morning, he told me a few days later, but his voice was not topped with the deep foam of warm pride and affection it has when he announces, "Old Jers had a nice calf last night." On this beef cattle farm, we keep 2 dairy cows for milk at the house, the theory being that one will be fresh when the other is dry, and if you don't need all the milk for the house, it is easy to put a calf on the cow. The spotted Guernsey is one of those difficult personalities a farmer sometimes introduces by accident into his herd and keeps there for goodness knows what reason. It'll be nice to have milk from the farm again, all that deep rich cream to send to the Brotherhood meetings. I gloated, and I can make cottage cheese my own way again, by pouring a tea kettle of hot water into a whole gallon crock of clabbered milk. I'm never going to milk her again, Dick said firmly. Cottage cheese, cream, and butter vanished as I listened. I never could milk but 3/4 anyway. The left hind quarter is off somehow. Unless you bend it down into a half moon, it squirts out in a stream across the barn. Of course, with a calf or milking machine, it doesn't make any difference. It's good rich milk, and she gives lots of it. I had 2 calves on her last winter, and I'll put 2 more on her now. She's really a good cow, he admitted, but she's so high-strung, she's like a hysterical woman. She never butts a person, but she'll run over you. I've never struck her, but somebody has given her an awful flailing some time or other, and I will say she probably had it coming. I can forgive her everything but one thing. When she eats, she never sticks her head in trough the rack and through the rack and keeps it there eating like other cows. She just barely sticks her nose between the slats and snatches a bite of ground feed between her lips like a barber taking snuff, and spills it on the stall floor. Or if she wants hay, she grasps a few wisps and jerks it back between the slats, and that knocks off all the palatable green, tender leaves into the bedding and manure. One morning last winter I gave her a whole flake of nice green alfalfa hay. She snatched at it in that silly way and jerked back and threw the whole flake clear back against the barn wall. He stopped for a moment, then said contemplatively, I knew I shouldn't have gone to that sale the day I bought her. The bread man was telling me his troubles with the farm people along his route. Farmers are queer people, I sympathized. Yes, they are, he cried, as if he had long been wanting to say so, and I don't like 'em. You have to love them to like them. You have to live among them to understand them, and even then you can't be sure. Even now, when I see Dick and Carr out in the yard talking earnestly, and Carr picking up some stick to whittle, I expect to learn that someone's wife has run off or set fire to the barn. But when I find out they are only discussing whether it's cheaper to grind your own corn cobs with the corn or buy them ground from the feed mill and add to the ground corn. Or to hear Carr confess, I sure let the skimmer leak at that sale yesterday. Dick, I should have bought that mare that sold for only $16. Of course he doesn't really regret it. He hasn't farmed with horses for nearly 20 years. It's been at least 12 years since he sold old Pat and Mike, and everybody in the family cried. It's just that he likes to buy things at a sale if they seem like bargains. When Carr gets ready to go to a sale, said Dick one morning, coming into the kitchen and laying his work gloves on the kindling kettle by the Franklin stove, he gets into kind of frenzy. Usually when he goes past to church or town or down to the bottom field to work, he blows the horn. But if he's going to a sale, he doesn't slow down or even look around. He went by like that just now, and I know he's going to a sale. I know just what I'm going to say to him. I'll just ask him innocently, was there some kind of emergency at your place last Thursday morning? He'll know what I mean. Carr will simply laugh and cover his face with his hands. Later, some winter day, when he sees Dick has the car flaps of his cap down over his ears, Carr will look worriedly into his face and ask, do the knit flies bother you in winter? When giant foxtail seemed about to take Dick's cornfield, one summer, Carr asked innocently, there's something I've been intending to ask you. Do you think corn does better with that cover crop? When Dick owes Carr money, he says, I'll just have to come down and board it out. Tell Iris to bake a grape pie. The neighbors agree Carr is blessed with what they call stanger luck, such as a hog getting well when anybody else's hog would have died, or cattle prices pulling out of a low just the day Carr sent his steers. Stanger luck, they all agreed, the time Carr got stopped on the highway by a motor policeman. Carr was driving his old but useful truck home, slowly along the highway, just before he reached the place to turn off onto his small road. He was stopped by the highway policeman, who began writing him a ticket for driving too slowly, obstructing traffic. In ordinary visiting, Carr can talk half a day, flatteringly or philosophically, without giving any real news he doesn't want to give, or committing himself in any way. He can throw the sharpest inquisitor off the track with his innocent, wide-eyed, I don't know. He didn't try to out-talk the policeman. He just sat quietly waiting. The policeman had just begun to write when another policeman dashed up, paused barely long enough to say there had been a bad wreck 2 miles ahead. The first policeman tore off the slip without finishing it and hurried off. Naturally, Carr just drove on home, slowly of course, as before. The day after he dehorned his steer, Carr said to Dick, hesitantly, do you believe some people have the power to stop the flow of blood? Never heard of it, replied Dick, startled. Carr was not joking like most of the local farmers. Dick has no trouble believing in water witching, and wouldn't think of having a well drilled without first getting a water witch to find the vein. Well, sir, continued Carr, you know, Dick, that steer just kept bleeding and finally I went into the house and told Iris to call Cassie Fife. I know farmers used to ask her to help them sometimes before she moved to town. So Iris called and Cassie asked, "What's the steer's name?" Carr stopped to laugh. I said, "Oh, he don't have any name. He's just a steer." And Cassie wanted to know, "What color is he?" I told Iris red and white spotted. Iris told her, and Cassie said she'd do her best. And do you know, time I got back to the barn, that steer had stopped bleeding. You can say I like people and therefore enjoy having guests at the farm. Or you can make a mathematical formula. There is an ever-increasing number of people, but the amount of land does not increase. Therefore, the amount of land per capita decreases, and one farm should offer both ownership and visitorship. Everyone needs, in fact, must have occasional reacquaintance with the land. It is one reason we need state and national parks. People can go to parks if they have no farm friends or relatives to visit. Yes, they could. But if they did, farmers would miss one of the best parts of farm living. One of the farm's finest harvests is the pleasant memories it can give to children who live on it or visit it. There is a vogue just now in this area of the survival struggle of the small family farm. For small farms to become recreation places commercially, this, it seems to me, requires a specialized talent and actually places the farm in the category of hotel and resort business. Not everyone could make a success of it or wishes to try. The pond back of our barn is stocked with bass and bluegill, which we do not fish, but we like for friends and visitors to fish there. We enjoy seeing the farm through the eyes of adult or child guests. To watch a child's pleasure in your farm is one of the happiest ways to appreciate it yourself and realize new truths about it. Roosters don't have tails, Daddy, 5-year-old Jeffrey Landy told his mother. Between gusts of laughter, they have feathers. Horses have tails. He brought this fresh viewpoint with him when he visited the farm. He had arrived early for a day's visit, and I was taking him up to the beloved hilltop. We hoped he might find an arrowhead on the way, so he was carrying a 2-gallon grocery sack. Midway of the field he noticed the young white bull grazing in the distance and entirely oblivious of us. "Oh my goodness," worried Jeffrey. "I hope he won't see this red spot on my t-shirt." The red spot was a spilled drop of plum juice from a piece of pie he had eaten before we left the house. "I'll cover it up with this sack, though, and maybe he won't notice." He was thus able to conceal the infuriating color from the young bull, which never so much as glanced up, and we got safely to the hilltop. We did not find any arrowheads, but the high point of the day's visit for Jeffrey came late in the afternoon when he got to sit in front of Joe on the tractor seat and drive the tractor up to the barn. Young or old, men visitors enjoy the farm machinery. We went into other fields and into the woods that day. Jeffrey and I were picking up walnuts from under the trees back of Ira's barn when Joe came and told us his friends, the Martez family, 7, had come. They had brought a picnic lunch with them, he said, but since they were good friends of his, couldn't I hurry back to the house and set dinner on the dining table and invite the Martez family, 7, to eat with us? Fortunately, it was still warm enough to use the dining room to eat in. Also, fortunately, I had baked 2 pies and some ham. This is the stuff of which family farm life is made. I wouldn't change it for anything. At these happy, unexpected meals, I think of my brother-in-law, Merle Lundy, and his good and true story. A large number of men had dropped in unexpectedly to a farmhouse for dinner. The farm wife, an elderly, fussy woman, had cooked up practically everything she had in the house or knew how to cook. It was a large meal and tasty, but she was not satisfied. She fussed and apologized and kept opening more cans, until finally one of the men said kindly, "Such as it is, Grandma, you've got plenty." There was one summer day graced with a number of groups of guests, all unexpected. Half an hour before dusk of that day, Dick and I met at the back step, each still intent on reactions to the day. Dick, who in childhood dreaded the dusk because that was always when the company went home, sat on the back steps untroubled, watching the neighbors' steers in the field across the road. The state of the house never bothers Dick when guests come. He wisely enjoys the guest and ignores the state. Mr. Walls had more good ideas about hog raising than any farm bulletin I have ever read, he said. "We do not raise hogs on this farm any more." He pointed to where the steers were walking slowly toward the neighbor's woods. "They're going down to get a drink," he said. The cattle went serenely, as in a world unmarred by an increase in taxes, or tragedy in Saigon, or the danger of Indiana losing its share of the dunes.